It's an essential component of our global economic competitiveness. We need the U.S. to keep pace with other countries, namely China, that are developing both digital infrastructure and technologies very rapidly, but also energy infrastructure. We know how to do these technologies right, but it's a national security imperative for us.
All right, welcome back. We're here with Dan Diorio, the Data Center Coalition. Today we're going to find out more about what's going on with data centers. There's a lot of conversation about them in Harrisburg and back home. Dan, thank you for being here. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, and we can just start going with a Q&A.
Sounds great. Yeah. So Dan Diorio, Vice President of State Policy for the Data Center Coalition. Data Center Coalition, or DCC, we're the national membership association for the data center industry. We have 40 plus members, which are the leading data center owners and operators, as well as companies that lease large amounts of data center capacity. And I'm a proud Pennsylvania native.
Great to have you here today. Thank you. I appreciate you being willing to talk to us. Look, data centers is a conversation that we are having in Harrisburg. It's a conversation I'm having back home, and there is a lot of information. Some of it real, some of it not real, and it's difficult for representatives and my constituents to determine what we're in for, what we should be expecting, and whether or not the data center industry is a net positive for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'd like to hear your perspective on it. First, let's just start with the basics. Why do we need data centers in today's world?
Well, data centers are everything that we do every day. It's how we work, it's how we learn, it's how we communicate. It's every online purchase, every electronic healthcare record, every telehealth appointment, every online classroom. It's streaming services, it's state and local government databases, military functions, you name it. It's an essential component of our global economic competitiveness. We need the U.S. to keep pace with other countries, namely China, that are developing both digital infrastructure and technologies very rapidly, but also energy infrastructure. We know how to do these technologies right, but it's a national security imperative for us. This is all of our data. We need it stored here in the U.S. safely and securely. And I think the best way to think about it is the average household has 21 connected devices. It's computers and phones, but it's also smart watches, thermostats, Ring doorbells, smart TVs, garage doors, lights. My oven is connected to Wi-Fi. All of that requires digital infrastructure, and data centers are really the backbone of the 21st century economy. Artificial intelligence is a important growth driver, there's no question, but AI is less than a quarter of current compute. Cloud is the dominant reason for data centers being built and put into operation today, and cloud is the underpinning of all those services that I just mentioned.
So help me understand this, because what you mentioned, I appreciate that. We are in the technological era. Everything is on our phones, on our computers, everything's connected, but it's been that way for some time. It seems like, at least in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and in my region, it's certainly true that there is an explosion of potential data center development. Why now? Why is this growth happening? And what can we do to make sure that our constituents are protected?
Well, you're exactly right. Data centers have been around for a very long time. In fact, most folks probably didn't know there might have been a data center, down the street. But we're in an era of extremely high demand right now. We basically seen demand go on this steep uptick, driven by all of us needing to be connected. It started in about 2020, around the pandemic timeframe. And so as such, the industry is trying to build out as quickly as it can to really meet that demand. And we know we have about an 11 gigawatt shortfall between what is data center demand and our current capacity online. And it's fair to say that data centers have gotten bigger, but it's important to remember that this is a far more efficient way. By aggregating all the computing and processing and storage we need, we're able to utilize economies of scale and do this far more energy efficiently than ever before. So as demand continues to rise, data centers are an essential component of meeting that demand, but doing it in a much more efficient way.
So just a little insight from my area. I do town halls. I talk to people. This issue obviously comes up, and there's three major issues that keep reoccurring. And I want to just, one, let you know about it, and two, get your perspective on it. The first is energy demands. You mentioned it. Our electricity demand is growing. Even without data centers, demand for electricity is going up. Where data centers are placed, that is a critical component to this. I've gotten a much different reaction from my constituents when a data center is proposed on a brownfield site as opposed to when it's proposed on a farm. And then finally, how is this going to benefit the local community? Let's start with the energy concern. I mean, one of the problems is over the course of the last 10 years or so, Democrats in Harrisburg have been actively destroying our grid through bad energy policy. We were in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which led to no new development of electricity assets. We are now out of it. We're trying to turn a corner and get policy out there that really encourages new development of baseload energy. But is the demand that these data centers going to need, are we going to have the supply in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? And what can we do to ensure that we can do this development responsibly?
Well, after about 20 years of pretty flat load growth, as you mentioned, we have several new demand drivers on the system, data centers being one, but also we have the return of manufacturing to the shores. And, in full transparency, data centers are helping to drive that because we need domestic supply of all the components that go into this. But we also have electrification, vehicles, homes, businesses, and industries, and emerging hydrogen production. So all of this is coming together now for a vast new era of demand. And as you mentioned, PJM, the regional grid, has been extremely slow to get new supply on to meet that demand. And we know that there is no correlation directly between data centers and rising electricity costs. Data centers, for our part, we're fully committed to paying our full cost of service for electricity. We're an end user. When we get our bill, we expect that that's our cost in full and no other costs are being passed along to other ratepayers. We know in PJM that we are about 50% of the increase in the capacity cost, but we expect that 50% to be directly allocated to us, and no other ratepayer should be bearing that cost. But as you mentioned, retirements throughout the system, infrastructure needed upgrades, and just basic maintenance. All of that, I think, is driving costs right now. We're not resting on our laurels. We're supporting tariff and contract policies to ensure that utilities have certainty to be able to allocate costs appropriately. We're looking at behind-the-meter solutions. We're looking at bring-your-own generation solutions in which we can utilize the expertise and the long history Pennsylvania has in developing energy resources. And I think it's one thing that makes Pennsylvania very attractive is that history, that skilled workforce to know how to develop energy infrastructure to serve demand.
So you mentioned bring in your own energy. That's certainly something that is attractive. When I hear about a massive project, the first question I ask is, are you going to be bringing your own energy? And in two of the projects in my district, they will be, in fact, bringing their own energy. The one in Bruce Mansfield, which is underway, and also one in Hanover Township in Washington County. Both are bringing their own energy. Both are on brownfield sites, and hopefully both will be improving and benefiting the local community. Could you tell us a little bit about the benefits that a data center could give to a local community?
Well, first and foremost is local revenue. We know data centers are a huge driver from property taxes in local communities of revenue. These are valuable buildings, valuable equipment inside the buildings. We see in places like Loudoun County, Virginia, which is really the epicenter of the largest and most mature market in the world for data centers. Data centers are going to contribute about $1 billion in revenue to Loudoun County in 2026. $1 billion from a single industry that is 3% of the total land area. We see in a place like Covington, Georgia, where the mayor wants to get rid of residential property taxes because they can make the difference up with an Amazon data center there. Red Oak, Texas, $13 billion of investment coming in on formerly tax-exempt land where they didn't have a revenue stream. And then look in Louisiana, where because of a meta data center, teachers are getting a $50,000 bonus. And in some cases, that is a 100% and even over 100% bonus for many of these teachers. Data centers can really help to drive local revenue that communities can reinvest in schools and infrastructure and services. And it really helps to address those questions of affordability in communities. But beyond that, data centers are not just stopping there at that revenue. They're generating jobs. They're creating significant business ecosystems. For every one job in a data center, 4.5 jobs are supported elsewhere in the economy. And I think data centers are investing in communities just beyond those aspects as well. They're looking to communities and say, how can we support your needs? What can we do to invest in what you need beyond just what will generate from an economic standpoint? Do you need a new fire truck? Can we invest in STEM programs at schools? What can we do for workforce development? We're committed to being a good neighbor. These are steel in the ground investments, long-term investments, and the companies are committed to investing in the communities themselves as well.
So, as far as placement, Western Pennsylvania, across the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, really, especially northeastern Pennsylvania, southwest Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, we have a lot of brownfield sites, former manufacturing sites. Some of them are former coal mining sites. Some of them are former coal-fired plants. Why would a developer want to build in a farming area as opposed to a brownfield site? And is there a way to ensure that we are using these brownfield sites as opposed to green space?
Yeah, and I think brownfield sites have huge potential and opportunity, and I think you're seeing the industry really recognize their potential from just a zoning standpoint. You know, being in an industrial zoned area, having access to that ready infrastructure, especially from an energy perspective. As you mentioned, you know, there are two projects already utilizing that in your district. You know, it's going to depend on the individual company. You know, there are companies that build to a larger scale in which farmland or, you know, open spaces may provide a much more, you know, valuable opportunity to develop at scale while still having access to available infrastructure. You know, it's important to remember, I think, that those decisions aren't made in a vacuum. You know, those landowners in many cases, and in the cases I've heard, have said, you know, this is a plot of land that is not really good for farming, even though we own it. And so we have the ability to sell it while not sacrificing our ability to provide, you know, the food resources that we need in this country. The brownfield sites are a huge opportunity. I think you're seeing the industry recognize that more and more and put more into investing in those sites because they provide that ready-made infrastructure in an area that's already well zoned for this, so we can hopefully avoid, you know, many of those location concerns that come up. And that's a really valid conversation to be having at the local level. Is where do we put data centers, and how do we balance where we locate a large site like this in comparison to where residents are living?
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's a lot easier to support a project when they're bringing their own energy, when they're on a brownfield site, when it was a former coal-fired plant that hasn't been operating, that hasn't been generating revenue, that hasn't been benefiting the community, and they're using Pennsylvania natural gas to electrify it themselves, and then anything excess goes on the grid. That seems to make sense to me. Another issue that does come up a lot is the noise, is that there is a noise associated with these data centers, which is also raises concerns about it being in more residential areas. Now, in the brownfield sites, this is another reason why I like using brownfield sites, because these are industrial areas. A lot of them have manufacturing assets up and down the river, like you do in Beaver County, so the noise wouldn't be an issue. But help me understand the noise of a data center.
Well, we know that noise or sound is an issue in a minority of data centers, and that's really looking at studies out of Virginia, in which a nonpartisan arm of the legislature did a year-long study and looked at that, and they found that noise or sound concerns really are an issue in a minority of data centers. You know, the industry has actively been incorporating sound studies at the outset of development, actively incorporating sound mitigation measures into their designs. Where can we put effective barriers around some of the cooling equipment to to ensure that, we can effectively mitigate noise concerns? Can we incorporate a proper setback with, some kind of vegetation barrier as well that will help reduce noise concerns? It's not to say that maybe data centers can't have a noise concern, but they, of course, are following all the local ordinances and doing all they can to mitigate those concerns. But I think what really matters here is how does the company respond? And I think you'll find from the leading data center owners and operators that they take those concerns very seriously. And if there are concerns that come up, they take all efforts and do everything in their power to mitigate those concerns. And so I think it's an important conversation to have, which is how do we address this and how do we address this in a productive manner? But as you mentioned, it's all going to depend where they site as well. It's why brownfields are a unique opportunity because they already have those built-in buffers around those, around areas to address those concerns at the outset.
Yeah, and a lot of them also have the energy infrastructure already in place as well because there was something there that was either generating electricity or using electricity. So, Pennsylvania is a commonwealth, and that comes with a uniqueness to it. One is local control, and I would just encourage you and your industry to make sure that you're getting on the ground, that you're talking to local officials, local communities, and just being as transparent as possible as this process unwinds. So last thing I just want to ask, the final product of a data center, I think one of the things that makes this conversation challenging is there isn't many in Pennsylvania that we know of, that my community is aware of. And so it seems like a distant mystery of what it is. And I'm curious if you could just give us a brief description of what a final product data center is and what's it analogous to.
It's a large, essentially, warehouse with servers inside. That's really what it is at its core. Those servers are connected to power. They're connected to fiber lines. They have cooling systems on them. And they have security measures. Remember, this is all of our data. So, they need both physical security inside and outside the building, as well as robust cybersecurity measures. They have backup generators as essential services. They need to maintain continuity of services in case power from the grid is interrupted. But this is places where people go to work every day. So they have offices, they have conference rooms, they have break rooms, they have, the tech industry stuff like foosball tables and ping pong tables, cafeterias. And sometimes they have community rooms, which are available to members of the community to use. So these aren't mysterious monoliths. They are the brain of the internet. They're the backbone of the 21st century economy. And they are a large building with servers inside, but we depend on those servers for so much that they've become what is essential infrastructure and just a regular part of our everyday lives. And they're bigger in scale. They are, but we can do it far more efficiently. We can build to scale, and we can meet the demand from consumers and businesses. Consumers and businesses are going to generate twice as much data in the next 5 years as all the data we generated over the previous 10. So we need the capacity to do it. We need to do it here in the U.S. We need to beat China. And I think Pennsylvania is uniquely poised to do that.
One last thing before we break here, Dan. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. Another issue that comes up is water. Can you help me understand why data centers need water? How much water do they use? And is the water usage an issue for a local community?
Data centers are amongst the most efficient water users in the economy. We use less water than food and beverage production. We use less water than semiconductor manufacturing. We use less water than what's lost to water leaks in municipal water systems on an annual basis. Virginia, the world's largest market, 83% of data centers use as much, if not less, water than a large commercial office building. Texas, the second largest market, data centers were responsible for less than 0.5% of the state's overall water use in 2025. Water can be used for cooling. There's no one-size-fits-all method of cooling. If you use more water, you will use less electricity for cooling. And if you use more electricity for cooling, you'll use less water. So there's trade-offs to both. And so you need to find the right balance between water efficiency and energy efficiency. And there are many different technologies that have been deployed for years to ensure that the industry is continuing to be water efficient. Closed loop systems or hybrid cooling systems in which you can switch between air and water. On the hottest day of the year, you may actually want to use water-based cooling because you can reduce your peak electricity load when we're all running our ACs. And quite frankly, I think that's coming to PA this weekend here, where it's going to be pretty darn hot. And so data centers are doing their part to reduce the strain on the grid. So this is an industry that is actively advancing new technologies for water efficiency, virtually it seems like every day. And we will continue to use water wisely, but also ensure that when we come in, these decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're made in a vacuum based on the local community's capability, their water availability, supply. And data centers aren't going to go and use water-based cooling if there's not an available supply in an area. So we're committed to being a responsible steward of precious water resources.
As far as I've heard it said, and I'm not sure if it's true, I'm curious what your perspective is that more or less a golf course uses more water than a data center would.
That's exactly right. We see from the national level that that golf courses are using, hundreds of billions of gallons a year, while data centers are only using, probably maybe something like, a billion gallons a year, if not, slightly more. So it really is, I think, putting it into that context and that perspective to understand how, industries use water and how developments use water. And really what we see in the facts and the data centers are amongst the most efficient water users, hands down.
Yeah, and it's for me, there's really three concerns, right? It's the energy usage, and how do we make sure that we aren't driving costs up for consumers and using our own energy in Pennsylvania, and data centers bringing their own energy. And the second is placement, where we're at. Brownfield sites, I would just encourage you to keep looking at those brownfield sites. We want to see those sites get back to some sort of usage. We love our farms. We love our green space, but we got these brownfields that could be used. And the third is just make sure you take care of the local communities. In Pennsylvania, it is local communities that are going to be making these decisions. We are a commonwealth. It's local control. So your townships, your boroughs, your municipalities will be the ones making those decisions. So make sure you get out there and talk to those people. And Dan, I really appreciate you coming in today, and we'll keep this conversation going, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Representative. Glad to be here. And yeah, we just look forward as an industry to continuing to invest in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's future.